Hi guys, sorry this video might be a bit late. I was away the weekend when two big releases came out, so I'm only getting around to recording my ranking today. But what we have for you today is a ranking of all 7 Paranormal Activity films, now that there has been a newly released one, Next of Kin, about 6 years after the previous entry into the franchise. So as we do on this channel, we're going to go look through all the films in this franchise and rank them, starting from the worst and moving to the best. But before we do that, please let me know what yours is down below. I'm really interested to see. And without further ado, let's get into it. Coming in at 7th and last place is Paranormal Activity The Ghost Dimension, this being the last film in this franchise to be released before Next of Kin was. You know, on paper it might have everything you want, you know, it shows and it links all the previous films together and establishes new rules with these demons. However, what's great about a found footage film is pretty much the amount of tension it builds with actually showing anything, and when you show pretty much everything in this film and use a lot of CGI as well, it kind of takes away that tension and mystery, because you know, you're literally being handed the answers. You're not left to imagine what is happening. A lot of the scares are more laughable than frightening, or it's just some generic scenes featuring jump scares, which this franchise has pretty much adopted by this point. And this can be quite a nitpick, but it's got to the point in this franchise where they stop conjuring up a reasonable explanation as to why they're constantly carrying around a handheld camera, especially when their family's lives are in danger. They have to go pick up the camera first before helping them up. Overall, this one has worn the whole franchise thin. And yes, it is ambitious. It does show what this whole franchise has been based upon. But as I said, sometimes if you show something, it takes away a bit of the tension. So overall, it's just boring, and as it doesn't build up that tension, I couldn't find myself that invested. Coming in at 6th place is Paranormal Activity 4. Just to establish, I haven't looked at anyone else's rankings beforehand, so I don't know what's controversial, but this 4th entry into this franchise doesn't establish any new ground. Sure, it brings in some new camera and technology tricks, but overall it's just the same repetitive formula for the 4th time. And just like Ghost Dimension, it lacks tension, but this time around, just because some aspects are so silly and familiar, it expands upon the mythology from obviously the previous films. That doesn't keep me engaged long enough to enjoy this film, as for quite a short duration I found myself checking the time quite a bit, as I found it kind of dragging in large portions. That might be because it was so familiar that I got bored, but even so, that's not a good sign. Coming in at 5th place is Paranormal Activity 2. As I mentioned, I haven't looked at any rankings, but I feel like if one was to be controversial, it may be this one. But as my first time watching all of these films, in order by the way, following on from the original, Paranormal Activity 2 just attempts to be bigger and scarier, but loses that claustrophobic feel of the original, which made me so invested. We'll touch upon that later on, but overall I just felt like the momentum in this film was constantly stopping and starting, as you know, part of the tension building techniques of a found footage film is long takes, and there were many occasions in this film where we would have long takes but it would result in nothing, thus not rewarding the viewer's patience. So found stuff like that kind of frustrating, and overall the scares quite generic. It doesn't feel as tightly edited as the film. It feels like scenes can run on longer this time around, and it often shies away from showing the viewer what we actually want to see. As I mentioned, if you show too much, it's not good, but I feel like we don't get to see too much or literally anything in this film, and overall it left me kind of frustrated. Coming in at 4th place is Paranormal Activity Next of Kin. This is a very tough one, and I think this may be controversial because I know the reviews for this film haven't been great so far, but honestly, I didn't mind it. As mentioned in the intro, this is 6 years after the previous entry was made, and it attempts to take the franchise into a new direction. You know, it cuts off the ties to the previous films. It certainly stands out as one of the most unique ones of this franchise, as it tries many new things, some which work, but some which don't. New things consisting of not just having, you know, the handheld camera and then the security cameras up in the corner in the house. You know, we have different things. We have drones, we have police dash cams, GoPros, just to name a few. But then it also contains third-person shots which aren't actually shot by somebody in the film's story. You know, it's like an external recorder, which feels really awkward, especially when they don't commit to it, because you get a few shots of it in the first half, and then in the second half it's all back to handheld stuff. As this film is part of the Paranormal Activity franchise, and it even has Paranormal Activity in its name, you're coming into this expecting some paranormal activity. Now, I don't think this is a spoiler necessarily because it shows it in the trailer, but if you don't want to know anything, just block your ears out for the next 30 seconds or so. But where this is a frustrating film to review and in fact rank is it does actually feel like it's a Paranormal Activity film, as it's mostly cult related stuff and there's not really too much paranormal activity. You know, I can't recall a huge paranormal event until about exactly an hour into the film. It's all just a cult mystery with sacrifices mentioned, and to be honest, I thought it worked well like that, but when you stick the Paranormal Activity title on it, you're expecting some paranormal activity. So it's one of those films where it worked well enough for me if it wasn't attached to a franchise which deals with different things, but as it is, it feels out of place of sorts in this franchise. But nonetheless, a breath of fresh air amongst this franchise, although it not feeling like it belongs here. Coming in at third place is Paranormal Activity The Marked ones, this being the first of, I guess, 2 spin-offs if you're including Next of Kin. And by this point, this franchise was stale. You know, all the prior films take place in a singular house with, you know, if you're lucky, you'd get a few shots outside of the house. However, The Marked ones does bring a sense of freshness to it, not just because it takes place in the town, pretty much, not just inside the house. It does explore a few different aspects which are shown on screen in the flesh. It's not, you know, like just in the corner of the camera. You're literally shown it right in front of you. It works somewhat as a mystery, not just the family, you know, in a house waiting for events to happen to catch it on camera. They're pursuing leads. They are up close and personal with these paranormal events. While doing so, it does highlight that the found footage subgenre doesn't really feel the same as it did back in the day. And as I mentioned in the Ghost Dimensions, once it does show quite a bit on screen, it loses a lot of its tension, and I never found a sense of tension too much in this film, and all around just a lot of aspects were quite predictable. I could say the same for all these films, but as you're dealing with a found footage film, you're not going to recruit too many big name actors, if any. So I found the acting very poor in this film, and especially distracting compared to the others. This film does provide a much needed freshness to the franchise, but proves it didn't need to go on for this long. Coming in at second place is Paranormal Activity 3. As I mentioned, the second Paranormal Activity film had already taken the franchise in a tedious direction. However, Paranormal Activity 3 does the opposite and provides a lot of action and brutality from the franchise up to this point without actually really showing it like the later films do. As I mentioned, that's what you want from a found footage film, to not really show too much, and the way this film does it, it does a solid job. Its twists seem to come out of nowhere, and as it is a prequel, we can get some nice ties and kind of link things together. The change of location in this film, which you don't really get too much from these early ones, does take away the claustrophobic aspect that made the first film a success, especially because it just comes, you know, as things are starting to get really tense. If it happened consistently throughout, it would be okay, but as the tension is building and they get out the house, the claustrophobic feeling does vanish a little bit. However, when that action does come, it is quite shocking, as we haven't seen anything as graphic up to this point. Was it ever in doubt? Coming in at first place is Paranormal Activity. This film breathes new life into the found footage subgenre, and as I'm making this video, birthed a franchise in the found footage format. But thanks to its basic approach, it contains a lot of silence, and if you've watched my videos, you know I do appreciate a bit of silence, and it does build tension as long as something's happening. And that's what this film, although it's a short film, it does take its time setting up things. You know, first night the door just opens a little bit, but then by the end, someone's being dragged out of their bed by what appears to be nothing. So it does take its time setting up these things, and I think it does a good job in doing so. It literally draws you in. When you're watching it, you see a little thing happen, and it brings you closer to your screen just to make sure you don't miss anything, and some aspect can really be shocking. Film's effects are truly terrifying, as certain scares can come out of nowhere, or you just won't have a scare. You know, it'll be a long pause, you'll be expecting something and then teases you by not having anything, or you'll just be minding your own business watching a normal scene and then bam, something comes out of nowhere. So I think this franchise peaked with its first film and maybe tried to establish something that wasn't intended to be there from the start, but nonetheless I still thought this was a good found footage film, and that is why it comes in first place. Thank you so much for watching this video. As I mentioned, if you want to leave your thoughts of this franchise, please let me know down below, as I'm intrigued to see what other people think, because I haven't checked out any lists beforehand. If you want to see my previous video, which is a ranking of Denis Villeneuve's films now that Dune has come out, I'll leave a clickable card up in the corner here for you to check it out. I've said this in that video, but I really appreciate the support on this channel lately. I'm really growing quite fast now, and I couldn't have done it without you guys. So if you could keep it up, that would be great. But anyways, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you in my next video.